Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode is number 130, Making Pieced Borders Fit. But before we get to that, I'd like to talk a little bit about some things from last week. First, I had this on the board and I failed to show it. On the spider, again, if you didn't see last week's episode, it's Elizabeth Hartman's Happy Halloween pattern. And she had these little eyes to be black. And my first ones I made black, but you couldn't see them. So I made a new eye rest of the headpiece and used this bright orange fairy frost. And I really like it. You can see them. So to me, it's always worth remaking something if you're going to make it substantially better. The other thing is, we did get a lot of comments offering piecing tips. And while my episode focused specifically on tiny piecing, these are tips that we should use every day. So in my opinion, they are worth mentioning. Many people mention stitch length. When my machines come from the Bernina factory, they're set at 2.5. That's way too long for me. I reset mine so that they will come on to 1.75. And I find that a really good piecing length. Now, some people would even shorten it further to do foundation paper piecing, but I find that the 1.75 works for me for that as well. Dual feed. If you have a machine that has a dual feed, I would use it 100% of the time when I'm doing regular piecing. The machine that I had on the table that I was demonstrating to you was a model that did not have dual feed, hence I didn't have it on. But the machine that I use the most for piecing does have it, and again, I have it on 100% of the time when I am just doing regular everyday piecing. 0mm stitch plate was also mentioned, and that too is something I use 100% of the time. If we've just put on a binding and used a serpentine stitch or a zigzag and I have the 9mm stitch plate on, before I start piecing, I take off that stitch plate and put on the 0mm stitch plate. To me, it just, again, helps with accurate everyday piecing. And the last thing, someone mentioned strip piecing. And in Elizabeth Hartman's pattern, she does have you strip piece these little pieces here. So mine were strip pieced, but I use strip piecing in any pattern that it works for, whether the author wrote it in the pattern or not. If I can do strip piecing, I do it because, in my opinion, it is more efficient and more accurate. And that's what I am always going for. So that's it for the updates from last week. Let's get to today's episode. Making pieced borders fit. While I'm all in favor of using leftover pieces from making the quilt top for a border, what I don't like, and I see it all the time, is someone puts squares as a border and they get to the top or the bottom and it's a half a square or a third of a square. And I think it's just because people don't know how to get to make the height or width of the quilt top work for the size square that they're using. I made this alternating squares pattern of mine, and there is a link to all my patterns in the description. And I had some left over. I had some blocks left over. So I said, why not make a Project Linus quilt with it? Well, I had these 12 squares and I put them together, but they weren't big enough. the Project Linus minimum is 36 by 36. So I was going to have no problem getting the height to 36, but the width was just not going to make it. And in fact, I had to add 5 borders to get to a big enough width for Project Linus. So I first put around this border, which was made up of the same 2-inch cut pieces from the blocks. And then I decided I was going to put in a more looks like solid border before I used some of the leftover squares. So the first thing you need to do is to make sure that the height and width is divisible by the block size. And you always have to use the finished size. My pieces were cut 2 inches, so they finished to 1.5. So I measured my width, and my width was 23 inches. So we know from me telling you before that we always do the math without the seam allowance. So you have to take off the 1/2 inch seam allowance because that's in that 23 inches as I measured across. So my measurement that I need is 22.5. And if I take that and divide it by my finished size of 1.5 for my block, for my square, that comes out to 15. Perfect, an exact whole number. I don't need to do anything to make those 2-inch cut pieces fit the width. That's not usually what happens. It usually comes out to be a non-whole number. Give me a second, we'll switch out the boards. So now I measured the height, and my height was 29.5 inches. If I take off the 1/2 inch seam allowance, 29 is my measurement. I divide that by the 1.5 finished size of my square, and I got 19.333. That's typically what happens. So now what do I need to do to the height of the quilt to get to a whole number that I can use my 2-inch pieces? I need to add a border to the top and bottom that will be divisible by the 1.5. The next whole number up from the 19.33 is 20. If I take 20 and multiply that by my 1.5, I get 30 inches. So I could add just a 1/2 inch to the top and bottom to get the inch from 29 to 30. But picture that. If I had an inch, a 1/2 inch border here and a 2-inch border here, that would look kind of dumb to me. So I said, well, instead of using 20, what if I go up to 21? So if I take 21 and multiply it by my 1.5, I get to 31.5. So taking that, the difference from the 29 that I'm starting at, I need 2.5 inches to make it the right height to use 21 of my squares. So 2.5 divided by 2, because we're going to put half on the top and half on the bottom, equals 1.25. So if I add a half to my 1.25, I get 1.75. So I need to cut 2 borders, 1.75, to add to the top and bottom. And that's what I did. So the top and bottom are each 1.75 to give me the correct height. The 2 sides, because my width was perfect, I just added a 2-inch cut, which finishes to 1.5 to make my squares fit. And they did. I used 21 on the sides, and then I believe we started at 15. Yeah, this was 15 we set across, and so there's one on top of this border and one additional on top of the squares border. So we went from 15 to 19 on the top and bottom. And then I still wasn't big enough, so I still needed to add more borders. And I actually would have added a different size yellow here, but my math on the scraps that I had didn't work. I wanted to make this narrower and this wider, but I would have not made efficient use of the strips of this that I had. And if I used this width strip and made this narrower, I wouldn't have been wide enough to get to my 36 inches for Project Linus. So I think it turned out fine. I think this is going to make some child that's in need of comfort very happy. So I'm going to get that quilted as soon as I can and get that off to Project Linus to make some child happy. So that's making borders fit. Let's announce the winner of the batik giveaway. The winner of the bundle of batiks is Arlene Comandoros. Arlene, please send me your mailing address to quiltersheaveninc@gmail.com, and I will get that out to you right away. It got a lot of good feedback on offering batiks, so I'm going to do it again. I probably can fit more than this in the medium priority mail flat rate box. I will fill one of these to the brim, and we're calling this second bundle of batiks. So if you would like to enter to win another bundle of batiks, be sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And in the comment, write second bundle of batiks, and you will be entered to win. That's today's episode. I hope that you learned something today. Please keep all the comments coming. Until next time, happy sewing.